today's conversation, Mr. Medury, we'll split it into three parts. One part would be about, the more topical, more current in terms of, what is the trends that you're mentioning, the trends that you're seeing in terms of the hiring and, hope for people either looking or for a job or to both the employee and the employer. So that would be one part of the conversation. The other part of the conversation would be more timeless. That what would be your guides? You've studied abroad. You've seen global cultures, global hiring. Ways of working across continents. So your session or your sense in terms of how people management should happen, team management, whether it is hiring, scaling with the right people, delegating, etc. And the third part then would be your own journey, your own experiences as a leader. What has made you come this far? So let me start there, Mr. Medury. Let me start by requesting you to spend another 5 to 8 minutes sharing your journey, how you started, your opportunities, your challenges, and what do you see Prasad Medury in another 5 to 10 years from now looking like?
Well, I'm not sure. 5 to 10 years sounds very far away, and I'm 61, so I'm not exactly a spring chicken.
That's very young. That's very young.
But my journey actually started, when I completed my chartered accountancy qualification in 1981, which is almost 40 years back. And then I worked for about a year and a half with Ram Pudar and Godfrey Phillips in India, which had just been taken over by Philip Morris. KK Modi was a partner up there, so it was a very interesting time. Then I went to the US and did a doctorate in business administration, and as a consequence of that, decided to spend some time in academics. So I continued as an assistant professor in the School of Business and Economics in University of Kentucky in Lexington for about 5 years, got tenured, became an associate professor, and as the quirk of fate would have it, came back to India in 1990 and never went back. So I came back to India in 1990 when India was kind of exploding at the seams. I don't know how many of your guests will recall 1990 is when VP Singh became Prime Minister. And in 91 we ran out of gold, and that's when we ran out of money, and that's when the liberalization under Manmohan Singh and Narasimha Rao took place. So I kind of went through that journey. I spent 4 years with HCL. Initially started as Mr. Nader's executive assistant for about 9 months, and then followed through for 3 years as a CFO of 2 of the joint ventures in HCL. And then after that, I joined a multinational company called Silicon Graphics. It was the hottest technology company in Wall Street at that time. And it was a startup in the country. So I started as CFO, spent about 5 years, and then they made me the managing director. And I must say that's really when I learned to sell. And sell technology, very high-end technology. So it was a massive paradigm shift for me. So I was the managing director for India, then Southeast Asia and China for about 8 years. And in 2006 at the age of 47, I said I need to do something different. I kind of gone through 31 quarters, quarter by quarter growth, weekly reporting. I need to do something different. So I decided to get into consulting. I'd been in academics industry. I said, why not consulting? That will probably wind up my journey. And then my good friends, the Big Four, told me that I'm too old to join them. It will take me, by the time I become a profit partner, I'll be too old. So then they suggested, why don't you go into the sphere of executive search? Because that's where, your experience, your age, your connect, all really matters. And that's what I did. I entered executive search in the end of 2006, and now I'm completing 14 years now. So 11 years in my previous firm from Amrop, where I was part of the equity and the board and the senior partner, and now the last 3 years in Odgers Berndtson as the managing partner for India.
Fantastic. So when I looked at you and you looked at your profile for the very first time, the very first reaction I had was you are the leader of the leaders. So how is it being at the helm of an organization which is bringing leaders to different companies? What's been your biggest people lesson in the past 40 years of journey that you've completed?
I think one thing I consistently learned, Deepshika, over I would say the last 30 years, and I've been leading teams since 1991. I think the most important thing that I've learned that is to listen. You know, when I started my career as a leader, I thought I knew all the answers, and I used to be very directive. I used to tell people what to do. I think it took me some time to realize, but people have opinions; they must be heard, and more often than not, they know more than you do. You know, so the best way to lead is to channelize views, not build consensus all the time, but channelize views and understand what are the great options, and then use your judgment skills in identifying the right option and selecting it and moving ahead. And that also helps you carry the team forward. And there's nothing stronger than an inclusive approach to your team. So I would say for a strong leader, the most important thing is the willingness and the ability to hear, to listen. I hear some really strong leaders who have all the opinions, but rarely listen to the teams, and that's very unfortunate.
Fantastic. So that takes me to the second part of our conversation, Mr. Medury, which is on the overall hiring landscape. You've seen, as we said, you've seen things across borders and across years. What is your current sense of the hiring ecosystem, or I don't know what to call it. I mean, the trends or the current circumstances, the current context, the numbers. What is your sense of the hiring market in India right now?
So hiring in India is honestly multifaceted. You have campus hiring, which is very different from hiring at the mid-management level, which is quite different to hiring at leadership levels. So it's almost like 3, 4, 5 different buckets. And then of course you got different models of hiring. You got the pure selection firms, recruitment firms that don't do too much value addition. They're very good at what they're doing. That's identify people. They could do LinkedIn, Naukri search and come out with a whole bunch of CVs. And then of course you got the what I call as the more value-added recruitment firms, that is the executive search firms, which do everything from not just identification, but also the evaluation, assessment, holding the candidate, taking a selection decision, making sure the candidate joins, which is very important, and then making sure the candidate integrates into the cultural milieu of the company and is successful. So for me personally, most of my hiring mandates would range anywhere from 9 to 15 months each. And it's 9 months could be from when we get the mandate to the time we actually officially sign off our warranty guarantee period. And if it's a new client, the business development and building a relationship and winning could take a few more months. So these honestly are long ticket, long lead cycle, services. Very different. On the other hand, if you were to do campus hiring, and I did campus hiring from a previous firm, Amrock, for about, 8 out of 11 years. We used to go to a whole bunch, whether the IIMs, or used to go to, IMT Ghaziabad, the Ford School, or go to Narsimhanji in Bombay. Very different out there. I mean, that's honestly, you do a little bit of preparatory work. You go there, you try and meet as many people as is possible, take them to different levels of, group discussion, interview, a second level of interview, etc., etc. Take them to a psychometric testing process. All that you do on one day. Try and do it on day 0, so you get the best students. And by the night, you got to take a decision and make an offer. So it's almost like a 20-over game. While genuine leadership hiring of the model I mentioned to you is probably a 5-day test match. So very different models. Whether it be in the US or it be in India, it's not different at all. My counterparts in the US do exactly the same thing I do. They probably would do 3-4 weeks of rigorous research, a candidate identification, development, assessment, then make our recommendations and work with the client to make a hire. And eventually it could be 6, 9, 15 months process all put together. So, global trends have all come to India. So we are nowhere behind the world. I think we are very contemporary when it comes to executive search processes and trends. The search rigor, the search processes in India are identical. Hiring in India, has it gone down the technology route of LinkedIn, which has become much more prevalent in the advanced West? Uh, Probably not to that level. I think that's one difference. Using LinkedIn, for example, as a medium for hiring has become much more prevalent in the West. In India, I still think there are a whole bunch of job portals, and LinkedIn hiring is probably on the lower side. And obviously, LinkedIn hiring is limited to only identifying candidates. They can't do assessment and other things for you. So the trends tend to be they are different organizations that specialize in their niche, and they kind of service different kinds of requirements and clients. So, for example, we do the high-end CXO level leadership hiring in a retail model. We do nothing else. And then you got firms that do selection, recruitment, and do it very well, but they're not really the niche high-end CXO hiring firm like we are. So different genre, different niches, and that's how we all operate.
So, I mean, so you talked about different levels, right? I mean, from the campus side to the leadership and then beyond. Which is the level, Mr. Medury, that you particularly find most difficult to hire in India? If you were to say segregate your hierarchy into say 5 levels or 3, I mean, I'll rest it to your definition. But what level do you believe would be most difficult? What are the levels, and then which one would be most tough to hire as far as India is concerned?
So think of a pyramid. The peak of the pyramid is leadership hiring, which typically would be for CEOs, board members, CXOs. And then you come down the pyramid, you get to senior management, which could be N-2, N-3, then you get to mid-management. And then you start getting down to the entry level, which is all campus hiring, or need not be campus hiring. Not everyone goes to campus and hires. The most difficult hiring, the most complex hiring always tends to be in the leadership level at the peak of the pyramid. Because the talent pool in India at the leadership level, and I'm talking of really seriously good candidates, the talent pool tends to be limited. So probably in half our searches, we are adding on the Indian diaspora from outside of India. We are also looking at expatriates with our clients' consent. Again, sounds very ironic, doesn't it? A country of 1.36 billion people, give or take a few million here and there. But the talent pool in India is still very limited. And, the reason for that is historically we were primarily a public sector undertaking dominated country. And the talent in the public sector undertakings are very good, but they're not necessarily very entrepreneurial. They're not very decisive because of the nature of decision making. So eventually a lot of the PSU talent transitioned into the private sector, and that became the starting point. So I would just say it's 25, 30 years before genuine private sector talent came out on its own. And that would be the people who now are touching 50 years of age, probably a decade younger than me. People who came into the job, pool towards the late 80s or early 90s, the pre-millennials is really speaking the talent pool. So we don't have that 100-year history of private sector talent pool in India, unlike UK or the US market and all that. It's still relatively new in India. And because of the fact that we are catching up all the time with the West, we've tended to jump steps into the cycle. So eventually what's happened a lot of times is the talent pool has not necessarily grown over time. So that is probably the most difficult form of hiring. To go after a highly valued leader, convince the leader that he or she needs to make a change. And she's become very important today because diversity hiring is the need of the hour and very contemporary. And you'd be surprised how little diversity talent there is. And, I'm all for diversity talent. I'm a huge fan. Odgers Berndtson organization has a diversity and inclusion practice at a global level on UK. But the reality is diversity talent at the leadership level is quite limited across the sector. So identifying the right talent, convincing them, assessing them, taking them to the full cycle, handholding them, it tends to be quite tough. So it's probably the most complex form of hiring. Any hiring is tough, make no mistake. You go to an IIM, go to IIM Ahmedabad, go to ISB, for example, in Hyderabad, and convince a very high profile, high potential student, that they should not go to Amazon or Flipkart, but they should come and join a brick and mortar, organization is very difficult because aspirations and expectations are like that. So any form of hiring is tough, but leadership hiring is probably the most complex.
Excellent. So I would, there's a different model which is now emerging, and I don't know how much of it is now in India. Perhaps I'll need your opinion on that. Where particularly for the leadership hiring, the reverse model, wherein the executive gives the mandate, the individual gives the mandate, and then the organization goes out and searches for a fitting position. Has that come to India yet? I know that there's organizations in Europe particularly who are doing, who take such mandates. Do you see that in India?
The model that's in vogue in India is more what is called outplacement. So, for example, if I, as a senior executive, say enough is enough, I want to change. I got 3 ways of dealing with it. I can reach out to search professionals like myself and say, hey, I'm interested. This is my CV. Can you look for opportunities? That's a limited form because most search firms operate on retained mandates. They're not in the business of recommending. Or you can start through the network of friends, start looking around. The third is essentially go to a firm and say, I'm willing to pay your fee for placing me, what you call as outplacement services. It's not that much in vogue in India, because the whole concept of trying to place one individual honestly is way more difficult than taking on a corporate mandate and then finding a pool of candidates and trying to find out who's better suited for that position. I probably in my entire career of 14 years in executive search have done maybe around 5 or 6 outplacements, and more as a favor to my client, because they have a senior person and they decide he's not the right person for the future, but they want to do the right thing for that person, so they want outplacement services. So it's a client mandated service, not so much an individual mandated service, but that's really the way people try and do it in India. Otherwise, you've got to use the network, which is very tough.
Absolutely, I agree. So you've seen the sector. I mean, your thoughts are so crystallized about various facets of the sector. Define the hiring or the recruitment industry in India for me, Mr. Medury. I mean, it's a very it's very highly populated, but extremely vague still. Could you define that in your own words?
I think the hiring industry is a full medley from mom and pop shops, individual contributors, all the way to big global firms. And ultimately, I think they're all trying to place candidates for a client. I mean, essentially, we are client oriented, but we've got to be fair to the candidate. If you ask what's our ultimate mission, I think it's in Odgers we call it the 3 C's. So client, candidate, and colleague. So you're paid by the client, so you got to respect the client's mandate, but you got to say no. Sometimes you got to tell the client no, that's not happening in the market. You got to be very fair to the candidate, because candidates actually hand over the career in a sense to you. They depend on your advice and what you tell them to do. And sometimes you have to tell the candidate this is not the right career move for you. Trust me, it's not. And the third is you work with colleagues in India and across the world. I know within my own organization, we are a global organization. So you've got to be collaborative with your colleagues. So most hiring happens in that context. You operate with a client, you operate with candidates, and you've got colleagues that work with you. And colleagues in the context is just not search consultants like myself. We got research teams, we got administration. There's a whole group of people who do different work, and the roles sometimes are well defined. The roles sometimes can be ambiguous. It's a very large industry, and I get a lot of LinkedIn invites, which is quite obvious for someone in my career, in my profession. But people sometimes call and say, hey, we're not interested in yet another CEO job. We want to come into the search industry. And when I ask them why, they say, we hear that's the right thing to do. And it probably is. But it's not an easy move to make. I sometimes think entering this industry at a younger age is probably better off, because you get time to develop relationships, build a connect that's essential, build your repute as an effective search consultant. I think today, if I had a chance, I probably should have come into the search industry when I was 37, not 47. I mean, I've been very successful, but 37 would have made me even more successful at a younger age. So I think that's good learning to take away.
That's the aspiration of the 5-7 years. But you've done very well for yourself, and you're such a legend to talk to. But that I want to understand more about this industry. You, as you rightly said, right from mom and pop to individuals, and then to global firms like yours. But the there has been, as we were talking about, the job portals, whether it's a Naukri or a LinkedIn or Jobs Ahead, and then so on and so forth. I mean, there are new ones which keep cropping up all the time. So the listing part, the access part has been taken out. The difficulty of access. So what is the value add that the industry still promises? Is the entry, we believe, is very easy to the sector or this industry, because anybody who has a few contacts can just enter and then start connecting the dots. But what is it that keeps people here, and what are the, say, 3 things which make an organization or an individual a success in this sector?
So the what I call is the database sites are very valuable. They've taken over a significant part of the candidate identification process, but that is only one step in the full search process. I mean, the full search process is probably around 15, 16 steps. One step, the candidate identification, which is a very important step, is now being serviced by the database, but it is not comprehensive. I must say a lot of very senior people don't have their names and details on LinkedIn. You'd be surprised how many don't. Right. A lot of CEOs and all actually believe that their personal brands are strong enough. They don't need to be on LinkedIn. So it's not that LinkedIn has all the candidates that are relevant for a position out there. So that's I think one gap. But by and large, whether it's LinkedIn or Naukri or other database sites, they do a fairly good job of capturing a lot of talent. So that's one thing they do. But if you look and say the search process is far more complex, if I had to say what's the biggest challenges in search, Deepshika, I think it is the right assessment of a candidate. Do they fit? I mean, it's not skills alone that we're matching. We're also matching cultural fitment. I mean, the cultural fitment in a Tata company is very different than that, say, in Reliance, than that, say, in a more entrepreneurial startup. Very different cultures. So the whole assessment of the cultural fitment, what we look at is the fitment of mindset, and mindset reflects the ability to change and the ability to act in the face of disruption. So that's a very important aspect, which obviously none of these database sites do. And the other aspect, which is equally important, is holding the candidate for a certain period of time through the process. I mean, like I said, the process can go on for 9 months, and an offer may be made at the end of 3 months. So holding a candidate for 90 days, it's very complex. Candidates can change their mind all the time. Candidates can withdraw. They can decide, they can change their mind. They decide one day they can't relocate. It's all human beings ultimately. You're dealing with humans. Humans can be so fickle and volatile. So the bottom line is the candidate holding process is as critical as the candidate assessment process, which is as critical as the candidate identification process. And simultaneously, you've got to manage a client. So the client management process is very important. So these are the broad aspects that have to be captured in a search. If you ask me what are the 3, I wouldn't say must, but the 3 important facets to be successful in search, I would say clearly one is having some form of a network. Not everyone has a perfect network or Rolodex or Connect, but having good network among CEOs, owner promoters, board members, and of course senior HR directors is important. That really helps you in the business development process. I think 2 is, all of us cannot do everything. I mean, it's a huge market out there and so many verticals, so many segments, so many positions. I think understanding what you think you can do and showing you have the domain understanding out there. So for example, if I'm saying I'm good in industrial or infrastructure, it's because I've worked in the sectors before, or it's because I've done so many searches in the sectors. So the domain understanding is important, because when you have a discussion with the client, They appreciate if they realize that you understand the sector well, not as well as they do. They are the masters. But ultimately, you've got good working knowledge of the sector. You understand the business drivers, the challenges, the business models. It makes life easier for them. The third aspect is inevitably, do you have the right search credentials? Because Deepshika's search is a science. It's not hit and try. It's not hit and error. It's a science. You need to have a clear process by which you do search, and you do it every day. So the bottom line is these are the three legs of the stool that's necessary to succeed. Network, search credentials, and some domain understanding.
Excellent, excellent. So, one last question on this part that I would have, Mr. Medury, is that you've seen growth of organizations from an X level to Y level. For the smaller hiring organizations out there, what would be your, say, 3 lessons? My favorite number is 3 because I believe that at 3 your attention span kind of stays sharpest. So what would be 3 lessons for a hiring organization which is looking to scale?
I think the first and most obvious is they should settle for the best talent, should not compromise. Sometimes smaller organizations, startups believe they can't get the best talent. That's not true. You need to get the best talent who has the mindset that they will enjoy the industry you're in. The startup mentality is different than a large established company. So I think one is settle for the best talent. 2, I think, is identify the compensation structure and model that will work for you. Very hard for a startup to match what a Unilever does or what Reliance Industry does. So you got to do what you can do and have the right model to attract the talent. And I think the third part, which is not necessarily linked to hiring, but as a consequence, is the ability to retain the talent. I mean, you hire the best talent. You come with a very attractive compensation model, and gee whiz, they leave in 6 months. It's a disaster. And I see a lot of startups going through that phase. They're not able to hold back the talent. So they need to have the right talent holding, talent management strategy. And a lot of time at senior levels, that strategy has to be handled and mentored by the founder, promoter, or the CEO, or a senior board member. It cannot be delegated down the line. Hiring is ultimately a line manager's function. It is not a HR function. HR is a facilitator. The line manager is the best HR manager when it comes to recruitment. If I'm a candidate, I am much more concerned what the line manager is telling me, because ultimately that person is going to be my reporting boss, than what any HR person is telling me. So someone has to own it, and it typically has to be owned by someone who ultimately will lead the organization.
So if I were to ask a question completely offline, I know this is your client base, and you would probably be guarded when answering this question. Amongst your clients, who's your user and who's your buyer? Who's a bigger influence, and who would you go and sell to? Do you sell to the user, which is the line manager in your case? Or would you sell to the buyer, which is the HR team? Or is HR the buyer? Or is the buyer also the line manager in your case?
In most large companies, both are involved. The line manager, say the CEO, has a very important say, because ultimately they are the people who decide what positions are required, especially when it comes to new positions and business directions. HR is obviously the facilitator, but HR ultimately runs the process, of selecting a search firm, and they go through the rather tough process of negotiation and all that. So they are the process owner. When you look at smaller organizations, typically you find it is the CEO who will be the decision maker, and the HR person may not be senior enough in that case to actually, they're more the process facilitators, not the process owners. So if I'm working with a large Indian conglomerate, a big promoter-owned corporation, ideally the network should hopefully be at the promoter's level, or at least at a whole-time director's level, a CEO's level. Or it should be at the group HR director's level. Those are the levels at which a lot of decisions get taken. The more extensive the network, Deepshika, the better off. It's like key account management. Key account management is not limited to one connect point or one network. You got to develop a more comprehensive network, and you got to kind of identify who will manage that network from your organization. So it's all Miller-Hyman key account management in one form or the other.
Very last question I have, Mr. Medury, is about the culture fit. You talked about organization, you talked about a long lead time that you yourself would like to incorporate in the process, by structure, by design, by will, that to make sure that the fit is right, particularly at the senior level. How do you gauge the culture in your client organization? Do you have structured mechanisms to gauge and therefore get the right person, or is it more what is being said and discussed?
Both subjective and objective. Subjective in the sense you try and do as much debriefing as is possible before the actual search process starts. So we call it the search diagnostic. So like a physician, you try and diagnose as much of the issue. You try and diagnose what drives success in the organization, who are the successful people in the organization, and what characteristics do they bring to the table, and what works and doesn't work. So the do's and don'ts. You talk to as many stakeholders as is possible. And sometimes they all give you different perspectives, doesn't matter. You're still getting knowledge. That's a subjective part. And then you kind of build that into a filtering mechanism when you look at candidates in the assessment process. The objective part is having a leadership assessment psychometric tool that you can apply based on what you understand in the debriefing and what priorities are being assigned by the client. So sometimes clients say, the leadership maturity is the single most important thing for me. Sometimes clients say the ability to handle ambiguity is the most important thing to me. I don't want people to come from a very structured background because they can't handle ambiguity. Sometimes clients say, hey, I need an entrepreneur. Be clear about me. Be clear about that. Get someone who thinks like me as a businessman. These are different priorities that we try and put into our leadership assessment tool, and we ask the candidates to go through the tool. And the idea is to see whether the results validate our own thinking. So we're not asking the tool to replace our thinking. Our thinking ultimately and our decision making comes from our debriefing and our interview of the candidate. But the idea is there's a validation mechanism we tend to use. After all, we're very human. We can sometimes select lemons and not realize it. So idea is to avoid that. So this is the process we tend to follow.
It's forcing me to ask the leading question. I would have not asked that, but how do you judge the unstated? The spoken ones are very clear, but the culture is largely unspoken, right?
Sometimes it's observing in a debriefing. So many times when you go for a debriefing with owner, promoter, a founder, a CEO, the body language, a lot of people say politically correct things, but the body language is so important. When you ask a question about how autonomous is the role, how much delegation, the language can be perfect. Oh, we are totally empowered. We believe in people. The body language is more important. The body language sometimes is, are you kidding? There's only one decision maker, and that's me. So I think we learn to recognize body language. I prefer to do debriefing in person, which in the COVID era has been very difficult, to be honest. So we're trying to do as much Zoom calls like this. But I think the idea is also to ask multiple stakeholders, because then you start to get different messages and then you filter through the noise and try and understand what works in the organization. That's why I say again, Deepshika, search is a science. It's not hit and run. It's a science.
I know I have to let go of the conversation, but I'm not being able to let go. I'll ask one more last question, and then that's that way. As a leader, as yourself, you've been there, done that, seen so much, and therefore you can make those judgment calls when you see the body language, when you see the structure or the stated and the unstated. How do you bring it to life when the front ending is done by your team? How do you ensure that your team carries the same set of exposure or thought process as you?
So depending on the complexity of the client and the seniority of the position, different team members would go. If it is a large client and the briefing is being done by someone I know personally, obviously I'll go. It's a relationship network issue. On the other hand, if it's an existing client and other team members have dealt with it, it's very possible one of them could go. Hard for me to be present everywhere, and that's not the logic. Younger team members learn very fast and they got to grow. So I think you take the call on the fly. Honestly, I try and prioritize my time. I try and prioritize my time. I don't believe in working more than 45, 50 hours a week. You'll be surprised. I don't work more than 45, 50 hours. I can't, after 8 hours a day, I'm not productive. I'm quite inefficient as it is. So the bottom line, I think, is to prioritize time and use the young people. They're all very smart people. I mean, someone who's in the early 30s would be amazed how smart they are. A lot of times when I do a search, I'll have an associate or a senior researcher work with me, sometimes a young consultant work with me. They're all 30 to 35, incredibly smart people, very ambitious. So you've got to channelize the energy and you've got to know when to step in and when to allow them to run the show. So I think it's part of leadership to do that. You've got to do it.
Excellent. So I have a few questions coming in now. Abdul asks, on the lines of culture, companies have been quite a lot have their culture affected by the place that they're located in. So it's location based. Do you see that going away with remote teams and more character of the company coming up? So will the culture be diluted with the entire work from home and remote working?
Not sure I agree with Atul. I mean, whether the company is headquartered in Delhi or Mumbai or Pune or Calcutta, I've not had a challenge. I think it's more the mindset of the people who run the organization and their own view of how to deal with people. So it's at one level, I think it's a little bit of the process orientation and the empathy towards people that counts. Working remote from home obviously has been very helpful, but does have its challenges. In our profession, doing remote assessment is not very simple. I honestly say assessment by video can never replace face-to-face assessment. So many things come out, but we all are making the best of what's available and I think we're doing a good job of that. But I don't think location is a constraint. I've heard the story of Mumbai versus Delhi. And I have half my clients are in Mumbai and close to the other half is sitting in Delhi and they're all very similar.
I was waiting for you to say that.
And by the way, I'm a hard Delhiite, okay? I've been in Gurgaon for 30 years.
So am I, but I would any day hire in Bombay. So, okay. So Mahesh asks another question. What's your view on the gig economy taking off in India? Do you think there is a transitionary thinking by employers and candidates towards this concept? Mahesh Jain is from Hirexa. He's a director and CEO of a UK-based talent supply firm based out of London.
Yes, it's taking off. We see more and more evidence of that. Of course, it's picked up a little bit in the recent past, but even before that, clearly the gig economy was very much around. We see a lot of evidence of clients now looking at what they call as short-term contractual skills, could even be part-time, to solve specific business problems or skill problems. There's a clear thought process with some of our clients that they don't need, everyone to be 24/7, even the working from home. They believe that actually there's probably a need for a certain proportion of the workforce, to become part-time. And that really would help the gig economy because you have so many professionals in the gig economy who could be working for 4 clients, 6 clients simultaneously and getting, genuine satisfaction and also making good money. So that's clearly taking off right now.
I have a last leading question to that, Mr. Medury, is that when you say gig economy, how does that impact the hiring industry? I mean, do you have a business model factored into that as well?
The business model moves towards short-term contractual appointments. We actually globally have an organization in our group which does interim hiring. It's called Odgers Interim. So it does short-term contractual appointments. And it is more specialized. Not all search firms do that, but a few of them do it. Some of them do it informally. So that's really the way the hiring is happening with the gig economy.
Is it profitable? Is it a business model that organizations are looking at?
Yeah, the degree of difficulty of hiring short-term contractual people tends to be higher because people don't want to wait 6 months to get someone to work for them for 6 months. They kind of want someone as of yesterday. So the business model responds to the speed and efficiency you've got to adopt to complete those kind of requirements. So the business model is quite lucrative actually. If I as a large company want someone for 6 months and I need it yesterday, I'm willing to pay, whatever be the price to get that skill on board at the earliest, because that's a priority which should not be deferred.
Excellent. Perfect. Thank you very much, Mr. Medury. What a lovely conversation. And I would, in fact, once we have the edited version out, I would love to invite you to a masterclass with speaking. It's been phenomenal conversation. I still am finding it difficult to let go because I have more questions coming in. But thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Pleasure catching up with you, Deepshika, and thank you for hosting me today. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Medury. Thank you for your team, to your team as well for helping us set this up.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.